Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first Fruit for Thought for 2024. My name is Tegan Davies. I'm the Head of Wellbeing and General Manager at the Oranges Toolkit. Lovely to see some names popping up in the session today. And haven't we got a session for you? We've got the wonderful Dr. Joep van Agteren, and Joep is the co-lead of SAHMRI's BeWell Co. He spent many years working on and investigating the science of wellbeing, how it relates to mental illness, how we can best measure it, and also how we can improve both well-being and also mental illness. BeWell Co aims to translate this knowledge into really practical applications, as do we here at the Oranges Toolkit, and aims to help people improve the way they feel on a day-to-day basis. Welcome, Joep.
Morning, and kudos for almost getting the name right. You'd be surprised how often it gets butchered. So
I have been practicing, I'm not going to lie, and I still somehow didn't do it quite right.
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay, welcome. So we've got 30 minutes today, and we've got lots of people dialing in, and we'll also be watching the recording. So if we can get cracking on a question that I think is really fascinating that not many people may necessarily know the difference. But is there a difference between well-being and mental illness? And if there is, how do we best understand that?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting one because we're dealing with a bit of an issue here in communication, particularly in mental health and well-being. We rely a lot on language to try and get some of our goals to be achieved. And what we often do is we rely on visuals to kind of make some of these more difficult concepts clearer. So some of you might know or remember these single continua models where you have illness on one hand, and then you kind of move from really not feeling great to this state of feeling mad to good mental health, good well-being. And they've been blasted over policy documents and generally programs left, right, and center. But when you start interrogating those two polar opposite states a little bit further, you see something quite interesting happen. So if you, for example, take anxiety as an example for mental illness, you think of symptoms like irritability, nervousness, not being able to concentrate, problems sleeping. If you contrast that with well-being, so you have things like meaning, positive relationships, optimism, sense of development, sense of autonomy, it shouldn't take you too long to see that those two things are not polar opposites at all. It's actually quite, in my opinion, it's quite degrading to tell someone with anxiety that they can't have a sense of meaning or that they can't experience optimism in their life. It doesn't really stack up when you compare those two things. So research seems to point more towards those two things needing to be split, and mental illness really being symptoms of specific diagnosable illnesses, and well-being being its own thing. Those two things have some overlap, like in depression, lack of purpose is a symptom, and in well-being, having purpose is a good thing. But there's others where they're completely separate. So yeah, what we advocate for is that you start thinking of mental health as I need to have a solution for the illness side. I need to know how to respond to that. But I also need to think about the well-being side, because there's a whole lot of people there that don't feel well, but don't have illness.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And it kind of, when you were talking about we need a solution for mental illness and then a solution for well-being, are there generally crossovers in the kinds of solutions that can support both areas, or are they relatively different, or is there a bit of everything?
Yeah, it's a bit of everything, but it provides you with quite a good little bonus, because there's a couple of approaches that can give you bang for buck in both spaces. I do want to start out with a bit of a caveat that if we're talking about the more severe mental illness, particularly the more specialized disorders, but mental illness in general, you can't really go down the path of recommending something that kind of works across the board. You do really need specialist care. But generally, some approaches that work across the board are your mainstay psychological interventions. But even stuff like spending time in nature, physical activity, connection is a big part. Generally, movement, sleep. It's really not rocket science, but people still don't really get it right. And in our opinion, the workplace is a great setting to kind of reach people who might otherwise not really be thinking about mental health or well-being.
Yeah. And when you're talking about the workplace, we know the people who dial into this, they're usually leaders in an organization or potentially HR leaders. Potentially, there's also people who are just interested in well-being. So speaking of the workplace, what kind of things can we do to support people and their well-being and mental ill health in the workplace?
Yeah, it seems that there's a bit of a battle going on in workplace mental health and well-being. So you have the psychosocial safety OH&S side that really is focused on what structural and organizational changes can you make. And then there's the how can we empower individuals to take some form of an ownership over their own journey through a workplace. And for some weird reason, these two sides like to go at each other quite hard, particularly on the old social media. But yeah, both of those streams really have a big impact. If you have a workplace where you know your physical environment really is hindering mental health, or you know that you have pockets where workplace relationships and manager behavior isn't right, there's no way around the fact that you're going to need to look at some of the psychosocial elements within your organization. But on the flip side, you can have a beautiful organization with people that vibe super well. You can have everything in place, and people will still bring stressors into the workplace because the workplace doesn't operate in isolation of everything else in our lives. So there's these two elements, and if you're a smart cookie in the HR well-being space, you're likely focusing on both of those elements.
Mm. And if I was to say to you, because I always find it interesting to cross over the science with people's own experiences, if I was to say to you, we're at a pub on a Friday night drinking non-alcohol-free beer or alcohol beer, whatever we want. We were just talking about alcohol-free beer before we went live today. If we were drinking on a Friday night and we were talking about well-being, which 2 or 3 strategies do you think that you would tell people that maybe have worked really well for you, or that you know is really rigorously backed up by the evidence?
Yeah, who am I talking to? Am I talking to just a general person, or am I talking to an HR leader?
Yeah, just a layperson.
A layperson. I think the most underrated one, particularly understudied one, is sleep. Physical health, I don't really want to be talking about. People kind of know the relationship there, but sleep is a massive one for our mental health and well-being, and it just dramatically affects it. And it's actually relatively easy to change. When you think about anything to do with grounding, so do you need something in the moment? I don't know, you've just had a bad phone call, or you've received bad news, or you just didn't do something that great. You can't really go past mindfulness, particularly in that case, just shorter mindfulness videos. There's hundreds out there on the web. I do know they get a bad rap, but the literature on this whole topic is just massive. You can't really get around it. And the third one, I'd most probably focus on some form of a connection, ideally outside. So I'm kind of merging two there. But if you focus on the relationship elements, particularly with someone that you've been missing, and do this while you're surrounded by some trees or some water, it's most probably not going to hurt your soul.
I just love this idea of coupling wellbeing strategies together. I just think that there's so much power in adding things together, because we're all busy, right? We're all juggling work, non-work stuff. Some of us have kids, some of us don't, some of us volunteer. And so even strategies that don't necessarily take extra time, I think, is really, really important for our own health and well-being. So I love that you've touched on kind of merging a few of those together. What's
Yeah,
your
and
guys?
if I can
Oh,
just
sorry, I'm gonna cut
quickly
you off.
just add one little thing to it. Like often, if you work in the HR space or the well-being space, and you give some of those recommendations, like spend some time in nature, people start rolling their eyes and they're like, "Oh my God, they're telling me to go and I don't know, hug a tree." But it's the evidence on these specific interventions, and generally the observational evidence is really strong. The field has moved tremendously over the past 10, 15 years. So it's really not a question anymore of whether this works. We need to start looking at under what circumstances can we best harness it. But yeah, as a workplace, really start trying to promote, walking meetings, coupling some engagement with sort of like social elements in nature. It's start to become a bit creative about how you kind of conduct some of your business. Is one of my key recommendations.
Yeah, and within the realms of the business, when you were just thinking about or talking about, walking meetings, I've spent much of my life at Camp Quality, which is a very, very unique culture. Fun therapy is part of everyday life. And for those who don't know what fun therapy is, we start most meetings with something fun just to connect people, to get everyone on the same playing field. And we had very little budget for wellbeing, and we managed to be super creative in bringing our culture to the fore as well as wellbeing. And the Camp Quality staff are on their staff conference, and literally today and tomorrow. And one of the old staff conferences, we had kindness ninjas who had 5 little kindness folk who were little ninjas. No one knew who they were, and they had $20 each, and they could do whatever they wanted to do to bring kindness to the conference. That cost the organization $100, and the vibe that created was actually quite interesting. It got people to think about kindness, connection, brought fun, and we know the beautiful power of positive relationships and positive emotions. So obviously not every organization is going to fit with that realm of so much fun, but are there things that you can do from a system point of view that would help integrate those things within a business?
Yeah, and I'm really thinking about that comment around like most organizations most probably being quite strapped for cash, particularly well in today's economic climate. The key thing that I would really start investing in is relationships. So arm your leaders, and if you're a leader within your organization, really focus on trying to model good well-being behavior. So there's this concept called emotional contagion. And it's pretty much like if you come into the office looking super grumpy and looking like you really don't want to be there, it's gonna rub off. So start modeling some of those well-being behaviors yourself, and start thinking about just little moments where you can elevate mental health and well-being throughout your employees' journey, right? So if someone has an intake or their one-on-one meetings, maybe every month or bi-monthly, just start the meeting with having a chat about well-being or mental health, or even implement like one of those fun activities that you were talking about. It doesn't need to take much, and all of these little building blocks can really do a big positive impact to your organization. Yeah.
What happens with the resistors? What do we do with them? Have you
I
got
would
a
say,
solution yet?
yeah. No, I think just take them over by leaning into their FOMO. Ultimately, people will start to embrace this, and will see the positive change. And you would have come across this yourself, delivering programs. Often the people that sit in the room at the start of the program with their arms crossed, super resistant, not wanting to be there, they will be the ones that come up to you at the end of the sessions or at the end of the program saying, "I actually didn't realize how much I needed this." So I would focus less on trying to ram, well-being down their throat, and just focus on it with the people that do want to do it. Do it in a non-obnoxious way, because if you go down the whole positivity pathway, some people would just kind of completely zone out. but just let them see and experience the benefits of these changes in cultures themselves. Maybe one particular caveat to that is that if you have resistant leaders who can block your initiatives and culture, then it becomes a little bit more of a difficult problem, because they can actually just completely undo all the positive work that is being done, by even if you have a big group of people going together. So yes, ignore defensive bad people, but not bad people like grumpy people, but if they're key decision makers, you need a different tactic.
And then you get into the performance management realm, right? Because ultimately, we know the saying, people leave their manager, they don't leave an organization. And you can have organizations with such well-respected cultures and have subcultures within even a department. And you can see that being led by leaders. And we see it all the time, you're right. And I think that leaders have a lot of pressure on our shoulders, right? Where, many people are juggling really intense workloads. We're all requiring to do more with less. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. But having leaders who are emotionally intelligent to know that they're having that emotional contagion, I think is really important for the longevity and high performance of different teams.
Yeah,
So
and from a well-being perspective, that's really what you do want to invest in as a company. We sometimes get asked, so what is the one industry that you have most traction in? And people will expect you to say, I don't know, banks versus emergency workers or blue collar workforce. But it has nothing to do with industry that you work in. It really has to do with individual leaders that see why investing in mental health has a return on investment. Because we do have to remember that they're doing a job. Your target is to run a business, and no money means no mission. So you do need to focus on the outcome that you wanted to achieve. So there's always going to be that tension between the productivity of your staff and taking some time off to work on mental health. But if you get that balance right, your productivity will increase. The literature is very solid on that one.
And are there any interventions that you kind of worry about people currently exploring, fads of, like you were talking about, hugging a tree and people being like, oh, here's another fad of hugging a tree. Are there any interventions that that potentially people are doing at the moment that might not be so great for their well-being based on what the evidence is suggesting?
I think two things really come to mind. One is not really that it has a big detrimental impact, but I think it's worth noting. When you think about mental health in general, people quite automatically flock to CBT as a solution, and particularly when you work with EAP providers that have general psychologists or clinical psychologists on board. Within the psychology education, there's just a big emphasis on that specific therapeutic approach, and it's great for distress, common mental disorder. But if you want to use it to build well-being, so your meaning, optimism, self-development, autonomy, blah blah blah, it's not really geared to do that. So you can't just take things that are developed to help deal with illness and then automatically expect that it also has a prevention or a promotion effect. So that's maybe one caveat, not because I think CBT will be bad. If you roll it out, you'll definitely help the 20 or 25% of people in your staff that will have distress, and they're there. You shouldn't ignore them. But there's most probably other solutions that you can invest in that both help you tackle that distress part while also managing well-being. The one that I'm a little bit worried about, and it's sad that I have to throw the term into the conversation, it's the AI movement at the moment. Not because I don't see huge merit and potential there, but largely because I think that some of the approaches that are being pushed at the moment might actually be harmful down in the future. I specifically refer to language recognition software and solutions. So a lot of the solutions now are focused on install this app on your phone, just type for 10 days. And then the AI will recognize when you're starting to feel low, or your keywords will start flagging some risk that you need to be managing. And I think there's a couple of problems there. One, you're taking away any proactive learning from the user, because it just becomes automatic monitoring and you're not actually connecting something happened, therefore I need to take action. But the biggest thing is that the definitions of mental health and well-being are just so all over the place. Some of these recommendations are just not going to be specific enough. And it's too early for this at the moment to be jumping on that as a big solution for organizations. Maybe talk to me in 3 years, but currently we're not there yet.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating because technology gives you scalable solutions, right? And so that's, many organizations will be looking at how do we create cheap well-being solutions to increase our return on investment. So the desire to scale can sometimes impact the outcome. Even when we talk about with our clients, the difference between a 2-hour workshop versus a 1-hour webinar is totally different. You have in a workshop time to experiment and share and connect and build those relationships and have a social learning experience versus, a 1-hour webinar, which is not saying don't do it, but if you've got the money to invest, ideally you want to invest in something that is going to have a better outcome. So it's a very tricky line, as you say, with the finance side of things at the moment, how much to invest. But ideally, we want to be people, employers of choice, right? And so people are looking for organizations that look after the well-being of their teams as well.
Yeah, and I'm a bit less worried about if you're a switched on HR consultant or someone with a little bit of background, for you to go to YouTube and find the grounding video that you want to put into your team meeting, or for you to go to the Greater Good Berkeley website and find a couple of resources for you to implement within your team. I'm not worried about that at all. I'm not even worried if you go to ChatGPT and ask them to create some script that you put through an AI video software. There's a lot there. What I'm really worried about is when we jump a little further into the AI murkiness. Yeah, and if you're a larger organization, you must probably need to be thinking of what resources can I do myself, and when does this become a little bit too complex for me, and I do need a little bit of help from an organization like yours or ours.
And what do you see other than AI being the trends of the future, or do you just feel like that's just going to soak up all of our time and energy over the next sort of 5 to 10 years?
No, I think the most immediate one that is going to be a massive change for most people is the psychosocial hazard and risk legislation. So that's already being rolled out in certain states. It's going to come in the other states. It pretty much means that people have to get their legislative responsibilities really well sought after. So you need to make sure that you really got your head around that if you work in this space. And because that is now being legislated and being pushed very, very hard, it's going to be a big topic for the next couple of years. And that's a good thing. I think a lot of people need to be more responsible about the organizational factors. The thing that maybe doesn't really worry me, but it's a bit of a risk, is that because we have limited budgets, we only start focusing on risk, and we do not start focusing on how can I promote and invest, which ultimately needs to be a combination approach rather than just investing in one of them.
And that combination approach is HR, it's risk, it's compliance, it's safety. And I think that's kind of actually the interesting thing about the legislation is maybe for the first time, these separate business entities are actually going to work to hopefully work together to create a solution that's not just, compliance driven, but that HR is not this airy-fairy kumbaya, like nice to have thing. Actually, recognizing your staff or not recognizing your staff is a psychosocial risk and hazard. I mean, that is in our workshops is already blowing people's mind of like, oh, people just should know they're doing a great job, but actually if we're not recognizing staff, that can actually cause them harm and their mental health, which I think is a very fascinating shift. And hopefully we don't go too compliancy as you're talking as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the questions in the chat spoke a little bit more towards that, mental illness compliance side, and it will take too long of this conversation to really delve into that. But I think we'll share some resources with people after to point you to some excellent things that you can consider yourself. Like there's a Thrive website from at Curtin that really talks about that psychosocial risk, but also talks about how to promote and invest. There's a safe work content. In my opinion, I'm sorry if there's safe work people here, it's a little dry. So there's just a lot of text, so it's a lot to get through. Whereas a website like Thrive is much more engaging to work with. And there's a couple of other websites that I'll give. There's one big evidence map on what interventions to consider for workplace well-being. It's literally a graphic. It's amazing. So I'll share that just so you can see where most bang for buck can be had.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And even your collaboration with Beyond Blue, there's that document that you've put together with how much evidence is there and whether it's a clinical setting or whether it's in the general population. Just such a lovely overview document, and that potentially answers two of the questions here around, what strategies can be helpful from a, a therapeutic approach, but also from a less formal approach as well for those two questions. And again, we'll share that with everyone post session, because I think it's just a really lovely, well done document with lots of hundreds of peer-reviewed studies to formulate that. And I think people like you, we need people like you, because we like to translate information that you research folk beautifully spend thousands of hours on into something that's really easy to read. And I think that's, one of the things that we're really excited to talk to you today, because you do that so beautifully well. And I think if people didn't know who you were before, in our community, they will now, and know how well you translate that message beyond just the research. So we're getting closer to the end. So I think for me, I've done all the questions. So you get 3 minutes of talking about whatever you want to talk about with wellbeing. What haven't I asked you that I should have asked you, I think is a nice kind of way to frame that, so that you can, get message across that maybe you haven't yet done so.
Yeah, your questions were generally on point on the main messaging that I would get across. Maybe a couple of extra comments on the final points that you made about that informal and formal kind of balance that you need to have. A lot of if you go to that Beyond Blue resource, firstly, it's written for like the general setting. So if you work in workplace, you often think, oh, no, this doesn't really apply. But yeah, remember that humans are humans, and they kind of move between workplace and personal life. And the issues that they have and can deal with in the workplace are kind of like a microcosm of what happens in real life. So don't just think that because a resource isn't written for the workplace, you can't benefit from it. And a lot of the things in there will talk to quite formal therapies, right? So it says acceptance and commitment-based therapy interventions, or cognitive therapy interventions. But don't think that just talks to programs. There's just activities that you can take from those streams that you can very easily implement within your workplace. With the caveat that if you are a bit more complex, you most probably will benefit from, taking that next step up. And maybe a thing that I would like to ask your community to do is that when we, as researchers, push out resources and papers, we would also love to hear from you as to how you could use it, or how we can reshape them to become much more useful for you. I think the Beyond Blue one is a nice one because it's a little bit more human-centered, but it's still awful because it's a PDF. So it's not interactive. It's not easy to engage with. So what we benefit from a lot is to talk to people within the community to say, okay, have you thought about actually making it in this way? because that would make our life just, also a little bit more exciting. Because I'm done with Excel tables.
What? Did you
I'm
just
not done
hear
with
that,
that.
community? A
I'm not
researcher
done.
just said they are done with Excel spreadsheets.
I'm done for this month. It's almost done this month, so I get to start again in March.
Well, on that note, it's a good time to ask you one more wellbeing related question. What are you going to do after this call to look after your wellbeing, to reset?
For me, to this afternoon, we're going to go swimming with our little one and the partner, with family. I didn't really realize, like, when I moved here 10 years ago, I think I kind of took my family at home for granted, and only coming here, connecting, like, they really took me in from moment one, and it just really made me realize how much energy I get from that. And I mean, it's 35 degrees here today, so being able to go and spend time with family in the pool is going to be nice for me to kind of recharge.
Beautiful. What a way to finish. There's water therapy, there's family, there's good old
Yes.
Adelaide sun.
What are you going to do?
Well, I'm in Sydney today with our team, and so we'll have some lunch together and then, crack on with the rest of the day. But I will go for a walk, I think, to reset my energy, which I think such a free, easy solution that anyone can do at any time, and it's just a 2-minute reset. So
make sure you hug a tree, right?
Yes, actually, there's a couple of trees I can. So
it's all good.
I've now made a commitment to go hug a tree. So for those who are in North Sydney today, the redhead hugging a tree will be me. Thank you so much for your time. Loved having you here. It's a rapid fire 30 minutes. For those dialing in, we will send you a bunch of resources to help you along your wellbeing journey. But thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Take care.